Hey everyone, welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm just wondering, are you fully caffeinated? Because that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm your host, Angie Miller, and we are going to talk about to caffeinate or not. Because we all know that, for me anyway, it's hard to imagine me going a full day without caffeine. I've had to do it before. It actually gives me quite a tremendous headache because there might be maybe that I'm a little bit, it's a habit and it's a little bit of an addiction for me. But some of us can't imagine a day without a cup or two of coffee. We might use it to wake us up, or we might use it as a boost before we go in and do a big, heavy workout. But when it comes down to it, I think there's still a lot of confusion about caffeine and how much is too much, and some of the other questions that we all want to know. So today I brought a very interesting guest. His name is John Salak, and he is an award winning journalist. He's also host of a podcast called What the Health. And so John is a journalist by trade. He has done a lifetime of research and articles that bring us information that help make our lives better. So I'm going to bring John in and let him introduce himself. How you doing, John?
I'm fine. Thanks, Angie. Thanks for inviting me. I think that was too glowing an introduction, but there's some accuracy there. Yeah, my background is definitely journalism. Um, we started What the Health really off our other company, which is Well USA, which is a site that deals with health and wellness information, and it's all done by reporters. These are not blogs. This is not somebody's opinion. We cover a range of topics, including caffeine and including coffee and is it good for you or not? And you're right, it is. There's a lot of confusion because it's not a simple answer and it's not a clear answer. And it really depends on circumstances.
Right. Well, and I think that I've read a lot of your stuff on, a lot of the stuff that you've written, and I like your podcast. And so let's kind of deep dive into this whole caffeine thing. And just so that we make it clear to everyone, we're not just talking about coffee. I know that when I think of caffeine, I think of coffee because I'm not an energy drink person. But I have discovered recently those Celsius drinks, those are pretty tasty. But I'm not doing a plug for them. I'm just saying they are kind of tasty. Don't know whether they're good or bad, but let's kind of talk about that. So, John, why don't you do this? Kind of give us a lay of the land. What is caffeine? Because it's not just coffee.
You're right. Caffeine is a drug. There's no other way around it. It's a drug. Of course, our diets are filled with drugs. And I'm not talking about psychedelic drugs, prescription drugs. Drugs are everywhere. But caffeine is a drug. It stimulates your brain and your central nervous system. And that's where it starts. And it has been around forever, or not ever, for thousands and thousands of years. And it is largely, when we think of caffeine, you're absolutely right. We almost always think of coffee, but it is insidious. It's in chocolate. It is in tea. It is certainly in energy drinks. There's always warnings we see online say, don't chew cola nuts. Well, I don't know anybody who's chewing a cola nut. I know it may be done in certain cultures, but it's usually not done in the States. And in case you're wondering, the U.S. does consume more coffee than any other country in the world. However, and this I found fascinating, we are not in the top 25. This isn't a contest. We're not going to start chanting USA, USA. But per capita consumption, America only ranks 25th in the world, which is I found fascinating when I first pulled that nugget out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I also think that like I travel a lot. And so I've been to a lot of other countries, and there's definitely a difference in coffee in other countries. My daughter dates a gentleman who's from Argentina, and he's like, "Oh, Angie, you need to taste our coffee." It's like, "Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That is very strong coffee." And so coffee definitely has a little bit of a cultural aspect to it too. It's, depending on where they make it, right? Where they're getting the ingredients, where they're
it,
getting the beans.
it's not only where you're getting the beans, it's how you brew it and how you make it, and that'll depend on how much caffeine you get in your cup. So, I mean, a standard American brew cup of 8-ounce coffee. Though I don't know anybody who actually drinks 8 ounces of coffee in a cup anymore. But that's going to be one level of caffeine, and we can talk about how much caffeine is in a cup of coffee. A cold brew has twice as much. It can have twice as much. Espresso shots are different. Then this is just coffee. It doesn't go into green tea, things like kombucha, chocolate, and other things like that.
Right, right. Yeah, and kombucha is a big one too that has been kind of hitting the mainstream lately. So speaking of that, I know that you've done a lot of research and your
Mhm.
company has done a lot of research on caffeine impacting people differently depending on what age they are, pre-existing conditions, how much they consume. So maybe let's start with some of that because it's not just a one size fits all. I could have a 10-ounce cup of coffee, but I also feel like I could give that to one of my seniors and it might impact them differently. Obviously, it's going to impact somebody differently who never drinks caffeine,
Yep.
because that has to do with it too. How used to how about our body is used to caffeine, so to speak,
I
right?
think there's 2 issues and you've hit on it. One is, are you used to caffeine? Because I remember this was a million years ago when I first started drinking coffee. Well, if I had 3 or 4 cups of coffee, definitely affected me differently than it does now. Um, However, I think the bigger issue, and this is also, and we can get into the, and I know you want to get into the benefits because there's some certainly registered benefits for caffeine or coffee, and then some threats. But I think the biggest issue people face with caffeine, and again, we think of it as coffee, is pre-existing conditions. So if you have hypertension, high blood pressure, if you're pregnant, if you have problems with bone density, osteoporosis, issues like this, if you have insomnia, or even not even, if you're suffering from mental health issues, anxiety, depression, or something more serious, not that anxiety and depression aren't serious, caffeine is going to affect you in a negative way and more sharply than if you don't have any of these issues. And I think, and taking certain drugs, caffeine can exacerbate or hinder those prescription drugs as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, if my anxiety is higher than normal and I have a cup of coffee, I absolutely feel a difference than if I've had a good night's sleep and I
Hmm.
wake up and I have my normal cup of coffee. Even for me on a day-to-day basis, I feel like coffee affects me differently. Has to do a lot with my mood state. It has to do a
Absolutely.
lot with my how much sleep I got, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the pre-existing conditions and then also how much they consume. You gave us some interesting stats about consumption, coffee consumption.
Right.
And I know you threw a few out there. Do you have any other stats like us compared to other countries
Sure.
or maybe stats about what we consider a cup of coffee? Because you kind of brought that up and it's so
Right.
funny because
This is fascinating. I love this stuff. It's fascinating. So, and this is the old journalist in me coming out. We drink uh, 400 million cups of coffee a day. When I say we, the US consumes 400 million cups of coffee a day. That is about 150 billion cups a year. Um, about 65 to 70, and again, these stats will vary a little bit on who's giving them to you, but about 65 to 75% of Americans drink coffee at some time during the day or during the week. And about 50% of us drink about 3 to 4 or 5 cups a day. And those are about 8-ounce cups. But again, this varies because I don't know anybody who really gets an 8-ounce cup anymore. Now, the other issue is how much coffee should we be drinking or how much caffeine should we be drinking? Um, and again, this is going to vary, but the FDA says, okay, keep it to 400 milligrams a day. Nobody really measures a milligram when they're eating anything or drinking anything. But that's going to amount to about 3 to 4 8-ounce cups a day because you figure there's going to be about, well, 80 to 100 milligrams of caffeine in a cup, an 8-ounce cup. The problem, which we talked about before, um, it depends on the type of coffee you're drinking and how it's made. So if you drink an 8-ounce cup of regular coffee, sure, that's a benchmark. That's 100 milligrams. You drink cold brew, that's going to be twice as much. 2 shots of espresso, you're at 120, 140 milligrams. And if you're like me and you do 2 double shots of espresso in the morning, even if it's an Americano, you're at 250, 300 milligrams of coffee before you waddle out to your barn office, you know?
right.
So that all impacts where we go. And if you're wondering who drinks the most coffee in the world, it's the Finns per capita. They drink about 10 cups of coffee a day. A lot of Scandinavian countries are up there as well.
And aren't they also some of the most uh, promoted as some of the most joyful or happy countries? Isn't
Well, if we look at the top 10, yes, the Finns are. Sweden is up there. Switzerland is up there. Now, and I don't say this lightly, a lot of the Scandinavian countries, and we can talk about some of the risks of this later, also have some of the highest suicide rates. I am not equating one to the other, but there's
Right.
certainly studies that equate coffee. And again, this is the problem with the research. One study will say one thing, another study will say another, and it's maybe based on pre-existing conditions. So that, that does factor in to that.
Right. Well, it's kind of like it's like alcohol. If you ask somebody, we always have to do intake questions as a clinician, and we ask about alcohol consumption, and we have to be very specific because I could say how many glasses of wine do you drink, or how many alcoholic beverages do you have a day? Well, everyone has a different idea of consumption. They could
Yeah,
be going to a brewery where they're doing a flight where it's teeny tiny, or they could do a 12-ounce
right.
jug of beer. So,
Exactly. Or you could be hanging out with your old college friends and assume you're 20 again, and you're into your fourth bottle of wine at an Italian restaurant in Milwaukee, right? So but you're not doing that every day.
right, precisely. So, we also drink energy drinks, and I think that's a big one. I think that sometimes people don't always put together. They're not just consuming coffee, they're also consuming energy drinks, chocolate, all those other things. So, let's go into energy drinks, some kind of interesting statistics about that, because we have definitely in our society I feel like we just keep coming up with more and more ways
Mhm.
to give everybody that lift that they're looking for throughout the day.
Yes, absolutely. So if we're talking about energy drinks, and this can vary, like a 5 hour, and again, you have all of these major energy drinks from Monster to 5 Hour Energy to I'm trying to remember some of the other ones here. Oh God, there's a ton of them, but let's say 5 Hour Energy, that's going to give you on roughly about 200 milligrams of coffee. That's a standard 5 Hour Energy drink. If you do extra, if you do I didn't even know they had an extra, that's going to push it up to about 250 milligrams. Monster could be at 80 or 90. Red Bull is 80 or 90. Is that an energy drink? It's something in between. But you're right. It's everywhere. And even, we've talked about this. We think of caffeine, we automatically go to coffee, but it's in energy drinks, it's in chocolate, it's in tea, it's in a lot of elements like that. And if you're mixing energy drinks with liquor or something like that, you have another whole element to bring in. So none of this is really simple, and it's so entwined. And again, it depends on pre-existing conditions and where you are in your life too. You
Right,
know
right.
what's happening with your life at the moment.
Right, 100%. Because, like I said, I think it has a lot to do with mood state. I think that a lot of things have to do with mood state, and that also affects how we metabolize and how we navigate our day, because our emotional energy is as important as our physical energy and how, our level of stress.
Hmm.
So, let's kind of go to the positive. What are some of the benefits of, let's just say, coffee in general? What are some
Okay,
of the benefits of us drinking it?
coffee, because that's really what, again, if you and we have, there are benefits that are studied and identified, and then they sort of say, okay, you're going to get this benefit if you drink this much caffeine or you consume this much caffeine, and then they automatically say, okay, that much caffeine is 2 to 4 cups a day, depending on what it is. Again, studies are going to vary. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to move too close. Studies are going to vary, but there are studies that point out, I'm not promoting our site, but all of these are linked in, and I always advise people do your own research. But you can find these out. It can lower the risk of dementia. Especially one study pointed out it lowered the risk of dementia in women over 65, and that's about 2 to 3 cups a day. Is it brain flow? Again, all of these studies seem to indicate a correlation. They're not always 100% sure why it is happening. Um, because if we think of caffeine and we think of it in coffee, coffee has over 100 other biologically active ingredients that may be presenting other benefits than we may first realize than directly from caffeine. But it can certainly, there's signs that say it'll reduce dementia or reduce the risk of dementia in women over 65. Certainly, it will do it for men as well, but there's a greater return for these women. Um, Drink caffeine and you're more pumped up, you're obviously going to be able to work out more effectively. Again, there's a correlation between drinking caffeine or consuming caffeine in coffee or energy drinks, working out longer, and then showing greater upper body muscle development. Is that directly related to the caffeine or related to the boost you get from it? Probably. Um, again, now we had talked about suicide before. Harvard put out a study that said for younger people, people under 50, 2 to 3 cups of coffee today reduce their risk of suicide by 45%.
Hmm.
Is that because it's linked to a boost in your endorphins that make you feel better for that period of time? Is it that you're more productive, during those, uh, and because you're more productive, you feel better about yourself, you're less likely to go into a downward mood stream. It's possible, but they see the correlations.
So something occurred to me there, but before I give you that thought, I just want to reintroduce you. So my name is Angie Miller, and this is Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm talking to John Salak, and he's an award-winning journalist. He is also the host of What the Health podcast. And John's done a lot of research on coffee and caffeine, so I thought it'd be interesting to have him come on and talk about some of the studies and what they're saying about this. But John, when you were saying that caffeine is maybe linked to lower rates of dementia, but also a boost in mood states, what that always makes me think of is we can say that exercise helps improve mental well-being. We can't say there's a direct correlation between if you exercise this much, you will lower your rate of depression this much. But the
No,
idea is that exercise improves mood state, which then improves feelings of well-being, which lowers rates of depression. I feel like is kind of that same correlation where if you drink some coffee, you have a little bit of a boost in energy, which is going to make you want to get out and move more. And we know that movement is good for the brain and the body. And also, to your point, productivity and energy, because energy ties into our emotional state. If we're low on energy and low on motivation, we just don't feel so good about ourselves. So to me,
absolutely.
it makes total sense about that correlation. It may not be a direct link, right? But
Yeah.
it's a correlation.
And it could well be, or it could be the, let's say, if the delivery mechanism, if there's active ingredients in coffee that again stimulate gut health, which is, you know, linked to caffeine, that's going to have the boost. But there, and the problem, not the problem, the challenge is research goes on and on and on, so that there may be there's certainly a correlation, and I don't doubt Harvard's study was accurate. They may find a direct link at some point as they go on. You mentioned other benefits, again, tied up. In certain cases, caffeine has been shown to have a correlation to a lower risk in liver cancer. They are not sure why, because we can talk about risks in a moment. There's also a greater risk of certain cancers by consuming too much caffeine. And there was another very fascinating different study, that consuming 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day for older individuals, and we're talking 50, and 50 is not old, but older individuals increase their chances or increase their longevity outlook by about 12%. Again, I think it's pre-existing conditions, because you could take that, I believe, and I don't have the study, I didn't do the study. I believe you could take the same group of people who had pre-existing conditions that may be more susceptible to the risks of caffeine and coffee, and that's going to create problems or
Right.
potential problems.
Well, I think too that when it comes to anything, coffee, anything that we consume, I think it comes back to how well do you know your body and how much are you paying attention? Because again, like I said, coffee impacts me differently depending on where I'm at in my world, so to speak, and what my mood state is and what my sleep is and what I'm looking for. And I can always tell if I overdo it because I start to get a little jittery. And the other
Mhm,
thing that's interesting is, for instance, my husband, he's dead set on if it's past 2 o'clock, he won't touch coffee.
mhm.
My sister, on the other hand, I have 4 sisters. I have a sister who will go out to dinner. It could be 8 o'clock, and she's drinking 3 to 4 cups of coffee, and she sleeps like a baby. And so, absolutely no impact on her whatsoever. So people just metabolize it differently for different reasons.
And even if you don't have pre-existing conditions, I do believe age plays a part, because I used to drink coffee with dinner when we'd go out all the time. Maybe not 3 or 4 cups like your sister, but I would certainly have a cup of black coffee after dinner if we were out, and we always tend to go out later anyway. So it might be 9:30, 10, 10:30, whatever time we were finishing dinner. and it didn't affect me. I'm a little more guarded now about drinking coffee at 10 or 10:30 than I was 10 or 15 years ago. Is that an age factor? Is it something else? I have no idea. But there, that's registering, as you say, your own body, or monitoring your own body. So,
Right. Right. I think so. I think we have to be very self-aware. So, John, let's talk about some of the signs and symptoms that we know we've had too much. Because it's not so much of what does the study say that you've had too much, but how do you know personally that you've had too much? I get jittery. I start
yep,
to get anxious. My thoughts start to go blah, 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 all over.
right.
What are some of the research signs and symptoms that you could say to your client? A trainer could say to their client, okay, it's different for everyone, but you know you've had too much if.
I think certainly jittery, and those are classic from research studies. Um, Anxiety, certainly one, jittery anxiety. Headaches. Headaches is a key that you had too much coffee, or can be. It could be other reasons, and that's because caffeine affects blood flow. It dilates your blood vessels. It can play havoc. Again, it's, too much of it. You can't sleep, that is an issue. And if you start to get extreme mood swings, chances are, well, could be a lot of reasons why you have mood swings, but chances are, not you, but I mean people in general, it could be, it's likely you may have had too much coffee. Those are the outward signs that you can feel. I mean, if your heart begins, you feel your heart racing or things like that, and you're not watching the Mets lose another game, or something else, then that could be an indication you've had too much coffee as well. Those are things you can feel in yourself.
Yeah, 100%. So, John Salak, I'm with John Salak. My name's Angie Miller. This is Strong Mind, Strong Body. We're talking about caffeine and whether we should caffeinate or not, and what are all the nuances that go along with us inviting caffeine into our world. So, John, I have to go to my favorite source of caffeine, aside from coffee, which would be chocolate. And I will tell you that a lot of us aren't eating the real, cacao. I was at a health and wellness resort 2 years ago where they were selling chocolate in its most pure form. And boy, does that take some getting used to. I
Mhm.
always eat chocolate that's 85% or above, but I'm telling you, you go to like 90, 100%, and it's an acquired taste.
Yeah.
So let's talk about caffeine. Is there more caffeine um, in chocolate when it's more pure, or is it the milk chocolate? Which is it?
Okay, it's absolutely dark chocolate. Dark chocolate. Again, you should do another episode on dark chocolate, because that, like wine, is one of those things. Is it good for you or not good for you? Dark chocolate has at least twice as much caffeine as milk chocolate. White chocolate, by the way, has no caffeine at all. Though I don't like white chocolate. Um, so yes, it does have more caffeine, and certainly the higher level of cocoa in your chocolate is going to increase the caffeine levels. So you're talking about 12, 15 milligrams of caffeine per ounce of dark chocolate. People who love chocolate can go through a number of ounces at any given time. So you could be talking about two or three, cups of coffee. The other thing too that used to be really popular, you still see it now, but cocoa beans, dark chocolate covered cocoa beans, or espresso beans, they're kind of cool to eat. But if you have more than a small handful, you'll really begin to feel it.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, I had a friend of mine recently. I was out of town and I said, I need to get some dark chocolate to keep in my room. And she's like, do you eat that before you go to bed? And I looked at her like she had six heads. And I was like, of course. But, because I don't ever think of it as a caffeine source, I think of it as something sweet to satisfy me after I eat dinner. So I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of
And I
funny.
suspect you're probably not eating 2 pounds of it at a time.
Well, I would like to think not. A couple squares maybe.
Right.
So, John, before we close up, I do want to kind of give all of our listeners so that they can give their clients some tips, or what are tasteful alternatives for people who want to cut back on caffeine?
Yeah,
What are some good, I love it, but I need to cut back.
yeah. Um, Tasteful is going to be in the perception of those tasting it. I mean, a famous alternative and an older alternative to coffee is chicory, and there's certainly, it is a nut. You can, individuals generally don't roast their own coffee nor chicory nuts, but it is an alternative. It is a roasted nut that will taste somewhat like coffee. Now, if you're a real extreme coffee lover, you're probably not going to love chicory. But it's certainly good. Certainly, you can go to things like herbal teas. You can go to kombucha also as an alternative. Kombucha does have caffeine, but it has a third of the caffeine. You can certainly go to green tea, which has caffeine, but not as much as coffee. Certainly, if you're looking to, and there are elements of going to lemon water, to things like that. If you're looking to bounce off reduce your caffeine or your coffee consumption, I think the way to do it is gradually and try and chart yourself. It's kind of like bad eating habits. You want to chart when you're drinking coffee if you think you're drinking too much and consuming too much caffeine, and you want to figure out how to begin to bring it down gradually. Funny, about 10 or 12 years ago, I was at Canyon Ranch out west, and I'm not Canyon Ranch, beautiful setting. Okay, this is a famous spa. Of all the things they cut out of diet, certainly you're not getting alcohol there. You're not getting cheeseburgers with bacon at Canyon Ranch. They didn't cut out coffee or tea because over the short term, the impact on their guests would be too great, so they couldn't receive the other benefits, meaning headaches, withdrawals, that sort of
Mhm.
thing. So you really have to do it gradually. And I thought that was fascinating. I assume they still do it, though. Again, I haven't been back to Canyon Ranch in a decade.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was at Rancho La Porta when I was having, the pure cacao, and also they too were serving coffee and so forth. And I think that's true because the going off of it, I think with anything, just like getting off of medication or like you said, cleaning up your diet, we have to do things gradually because
Right.
the adverse effects, people would be miserable if they're at a health and wellness ranch and they're used to drinking 6 cups of coffee a day and all of a sudden there's nothing
And you
available.
could get a
So
massive headache. It
yeah.
is almost like anything else, alcohol, uh, food, moderation is the key in balance. And that's sometimes hard, but that really is the balance. I don't think people, unless you have a pre-existing condition, high blood pressure, extremely high blood pressure, hypertension, certain pregnancy, not a pre-existing condition, but a condition, that moderation in coffee, I think is probably fine. Again, according to our research, I don't blog, but according to our research, moderation is really the key. If you're drinking a couple cups a day, I think you're fine, and you may benefit from it in a lot of ways too. And it
Right.
tastes good.
Well, absolutely. So I want to, John, before I close up, I do just want to kind of share with all of our listeners who, all of you coaches, trainers, all of you interested in fitness. The reason why I really wanted to present this episode is because I think there is a lot of confusion about caffeine and it isn't a one size fits all. It really depends on who you are, what your conditions are, what your age is, and how it impacts you. And I think it's about listening to your body and helping your clients listen to their body
Mhm.
and then individualizing your decisions based on not just what the research says but the impact on you.
Mhm.
So John Salak, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those of you again who want to connect with John, he hosts a podcast called What the Health, and he's done a lot of work as a journalist and has a lot of information out there. So John, thank you for joining us, and thank you to all of our Strong Mind Strong Body listeners. We'll see you next week.